I'm Gareth Armstrong, and you're listening to a Razor's Edge podcast. This is our new series entitled 10 Entrepreneurial Archetypes, where we explore mindsets, behaviors, and the things that potentially are holding us back as entrepreneurs. Across the table from me is Alon Reyes, CEO of RaceCorp, and before we started this recording, I asked him what is the origin of this series, and he said himself. Alon, why such an interesting way to introduce this?
Well, maybe that was a bit of a fib. It was me and a lot of research. What I was experiencing was a whole bunch of entrepreneurs behaving in a certain way, which was resulting in them not becoming successful, resulting in them taking a lot longer than they could have in order to become successful. And as I was working, particularly in the early days with entrepreneurs, I needed a way to label that kind of behavior that I was witnessing in the entrepreneurs. And I identified these common behaviors or behavioral sets, how they behave, that was preventing them from becoming successful or reducing their probability of becoming successful or delaying their success. And so I started to research all these kinds of behaviors, and I then started to try and work out A, how to identify them, and B, what to do in order to ensure that they didn't persist.
And so, what we're actually doing here is you're diagnosing a problem, and then you're saying, because we're diagnosing it, because we're shining a light on it, you've just said that, and people become conscious of this, and then they consciously work to change it. There is a real opportunity in understanding what our own archetype is.
Yes. But just like in most things where we labeled, we shouldn't see these as permanent labels. These are temporary labels that can disappear, and I can be not labeled with it if I work on it, if I'm conscious of it. So these are not I am a David, or I am a gypsy, or I am a thinker. It's not that that's my label. It's that this is my temporary label. And what you'll see also as we speak through these, each one of them have got a positive aspect to them as well. And that's often what makes them hard to identify, is because the positive aspect masks the negative part of the archetype.
Okay, very interesting. Before we move any further, though, there is a general sense out in the world, a message that we often receive around if we're weak in this area, all we need to do is find our yang. If we're yin, find your yang. And it's often found in people we surround ourselves with. Is this not something that we could do instead of potentially trying to take an archetypal pill and resolve things for ourselves? Could we not just balance it out with someone else?
Well, because if, for example, you identify yourself as having victim mentality, you don't go out there and then look for a partner or who has got hero mentality to compensate for you. It's not good for you to be in victim mentality, full stop. It has long-term negative effect. So it is better for you to resolve that, to understand the reasons why, and to resolve your victim mentality, than to then simply go and find another person to compensate for your negative characteristic.
Well, what I'm also hearing, though, is that it's characteristics and possibly a way of thinking as opposed to a skill set or a capability that then, yes, you would go out into the market and find that either through an employee or a partner. Is that accurate?
So we're dealing with behaviors, not capabilities or skills. We're dealing with temporary behaviors is probably a more accurate way to describe this. And so what's important here is to identify those temporary behaviors. Once we've identified them, understand what is causing them. There is an inadvertent benefit to that behavior, which is keeping you going with that behavior. But there is a much bigger consequence to that behavior, which is holding you back, blocking you, etc. And so it's important, if you want to be successful, to be able to dissolve this behavior quite quickly in order to allow you to move forward.
Okay, so we're not talking about capabilities. We're
No.
not talking about skills, which
No.
is where you might find that balance in someone else.
Correct.
What we are talking about very specifically is our current state of mind, the current way we behave,
Yes.
and how to identify what that is in order to be able to understand what is standing in our way.
I would add to that, it's also how you're lensing the world from your perspective. It's your lens of the world at this moment. And so by shining a light and talking about it, you're trying to find a different lens, which is more positive and provides you with a possibility of a better outcome, a better future.
Okay, lovely. I think let's move into the very first archetype that we have of the 10. And that first one is
The David.
the David.
So this refers to David and Goliath. So David is the small guy up against Goliath, the giant, i.e. the corporate. And David manages to slay Goliath using rudimentary weapons, a sling, and the odds on that kind of fight would have been on the corporate, on the Goliath, but David wins. And that's a fantasy that plays out in many entrepreneurs' minds. They come into a market that is very often dominated by big guys, a few of the big guys. They're the small guy hiding in the corner, and there's this fantasy that they're going to slay Goliath.
Let me jump in here if I can. It feels immediately like this is a very positive thing. There's a positive connotation here. I get to be the hero. I get to rise. But we're talking about negative behaviors that hide behind these positive behaviors. But I'm sorry, my immediate sense of it is that this is a real good thing.
Yes, it is. It is because it creates courage. I'll show you. I'll take you on. And that's what I spoke about earlier. That positive veneer over this behavior is hiding something a little bit more negative underneath. And that is that the response from the entrepreneur is to use two rudimentary tools that are actually going to damage them into the future. So let me read you the definition of David. The big guys are out to get him, or so he thinks. He loves the romance of the idea that he's fighting the big guys. His two weapons are price and personal service. Both of these weapons will destroy him in the end. So that's the negative side, is that the general response to the David archetype is that, oh, the big guys, they take so long. The big guys, they
treat you like a number.
Treat you like a number. The big guys are expensive. Because I've got low overhead, I can give you lower pricing. Yeah. So you enter the market with lower pricing. That's wonderful. You get some market share. You start to grow, and then you start to have people infrastructure, including management, and then your margins get squeezed. And when your margins get squeezed, you make less profit. And when you make less profit, it affects your cash flow. And when it affects your cash flow, you have a high probability of failing. And so that what often happens is that I price myself so cheap that I don't make a sufficient margin.
And pricing cheap, sufficient margin in the future.
Correct. Because now that's what I'm known for. And I've positioned myself from a pricing perspective as the cheap alternative. And I'll get work. I certainly will get work. So it's in immediate term, it's actually seems to be a good strategy. The problem is that in the long term, that you haven't costed for market-related salaries, you haven't costed for market-related rental, you haven't costed for a management layer, you haven't costed for a whole bunch of things that the corporates have. And so as you grow, because your pricing is low, your margin gets squeezed. So the solution might be to increase your price, but then you're now in a comparative state into the future between you and a larger corporate. The difference in pricing is marginal. And a client will say, well, between the corporate who's been around for 20 years and it's got thousands of people and is more reliable, and you've been around for a few years with a small price differential, I'd just rather go with the corporate. So you land up in this space after a few years where the air is sucked out of the market because your pricing has been forced to be comparative to the corporate in order to survive. And if you don't do it, then your margins are squeezed. And then, as I said before, your cash flow becomes a consequence, and thereafter your survival becomes a consequence.
Even if survival remains there, growth cannot occur. You just get stuck.
Yeah. So you have immediate growth, which is wonderful. And then it plateaus.
Yeah. And so, yes, it definitely feels like it's quicksand any which way that you might look at it. But you did mention a second one, which was personal service. Take us through that, please.
And the emphasis here is on personal service, not on service, right? So every organization needs to provide service. Every organization, in a sense, needs to provide personal service. But how entrepreneurs who manifest as the David archetype see personal service is you just, as you mentioned earlier, you're just a number. I'll give you personal service. So it's I will give you personal service. And that's where the problem lies, is it's everyone wants to work with the CEO. He or she has got the charisma to build these relationships. They become the brand. And so everyone wants to work with them, and they only want to work with them. The problem is that means that you have a finite amount of clients that you can give personal service to. And once they are used to that level of personal service, and now because of the volumes, because of the growth that you had from the pricing and your personal service, because of the volume growth, now you can't give them the same level of personal service. And at some point, it either becomes a problem with the client, or you then hand over that relationship to somebody else, and the client just wants to see you. And that becomes a problem. And now it's not personal service, it's service, or personal service through somebody else. But in that moment, you see entrepreneurs now losing a whole bunch of clients because it's not like it used to be. And they in this state, they're exhausted because they've got so many clients and they can't get to all of them. And those clients are then demanding and demanding. Things fall apart. They want to see you. They want to see you the whole time. And there's this exhaustion. When you have that exhaustion and that you're losing clients because you're not providing the personal service, together with losing the clients because your pricing becomes problematic either through margin or through comparative pricing, that becomes a perfect storm. And there's this implosion in growing small businesses because of those two things.
And so what we're really talking about here is differentiation. And in a previous podcast that we did together where we spoke about competencies, core competencies, critical competencies, and scale competencies. And in that conversation, Alon speaks about how core competencies are where you find true differentiation. And so if you're feeling like you might be David, I think that might be a podcast series that you will not only enjoy, but absolutely thrive on. Alon, back over to you. So let's just bring this home around David, please.
Yeah, so you've just actually highlighted the solution. The solution is upfront to think about this slightly differently. This is not you against Goliath. This is you against you. That's the first way to change your behavior. You need to be always trying to improve on you. The person that you're trying to beat is always you. You're trying to be better. When it comes to the pricing shouldn't be your strategy. Differentiation should be your strategy. And you should start early on in that differentiation. And it shouldn't be personal service. It should be differentiation with service inherent in everything that you do. So you're constantly trying not to be the person who delivers value to the client. That needs to be other people in your organization or systems or process, or the product itself is delivering value. The moment you are the source of value to a client in any way, it becomes a limit around your growth. It becomes a constraint into the future. which you want to prevent now. So rather get into that mentality, that way of thinking, so change your behavior to start thinking differentiation.
Yeah, this is a fascinating conversation, but I think we're missing just that one thing, which is if I'm sitting and I'm listening to this, how do I diagnose myself?
You would see this in a state of exhaustion due to the fact that everyone seems to be wanting a piece of you, particularly your clients. And the second way is your margins are being squeezed because your costs are going up in order to accommodate market-related cost forces in the business, such as salaries, rent, management, etc., that are starting to appear in your organization. So when you see those two things happening, you have a very high probability of being in the archetype of David.
And that is the voice of Alon Reyes, the CEO of Race Corp, but then also the originator through research and through his experience over the years of the 10 archetypes. And so that's number one. We've got 9 more to go. We are looking forward to being able to present those to you and assist you to figure out how to unblock your future because these behaviors are standing in your way. Okay, we'll see you in the next episode. I'm Gareth Armstrong, and this has been a Razor's Edge podcast.